This evening. We've got Craig talking about competition flying. Just a brief introduction to Craig. Most importantly, he works here and is making this available to us, this venue available to us. So, big thanks for that. So Craig is a patent and trademark attorney. Originally had a degree in mechanical engineering and is a senior partner in Madden, which is a firm that's based here. Been flying at Wakery since 1997, and he's done a bunch of cross-country flying, cross-country courses, cross-country flying since then, gone to all the coaching weeks. This badge flight's the longest being 600 kilometres in a pub tournament. It's might be a bit out of date. He's done 1,000 k's now, haven't you? So yes, he's done 1,000 kilometres. Maybe that's here. There's here. It's got further down. There you go. He's flown in competitions since the Club Class Nationals at Wakery in 2005. Competed in a number of competitions since those, and also an hour in the Pre-Worlds competition earlier this year. Owned Mosquito for some years, and now owns an ASG-29, same type of aircraft that I do. Did a 750 kilometre flight in Mosquito, and he's done 2 1,000 kilometre flights in his ASG-29. And he's done 174 kilometres an hour around the task at 2010 multi-class nationals. So that is impressive. It was a good day, yes. He loves doing accounts at Wakery Gliding Club. He's the treasurer. And he does also enjoys riding his bike and the odd bottle of wine or two. So, over to you, Craig.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. I know there's a few competition pilots here, other than Peter and myself, but I think the vast majority of the people, as I understand it, probably haven't flown competitions. And I think there's probably a few people within the audience that are in that category that have done a lot of coaching weeks and the like, and probably very close to going to that next step. So really, my task tonight is to convince people to have a go at competitions. Is that fair to say what you want me to try and push?
Yeah, convince people to have a go at competitions, and just for the people that are really keen on doing it anyway, just sort of have you take the first steps, make it easy for you.
So my first step when I was doing some badge flights was to say I was never ever going to fly in competitions. And I dare say that, well, anyone here that can state right now that they don't intend flying in competitions are quite prepared to put their hands up. Well, that's good. That's a good start. But yeah, it was probably a rash comment. I think what I'm going to try and do tonight is the why you fly in competitions, and I think that'll become obvious in the next couple of slides. What's going to be in it for you? So I think there's a lot of value in competitions. What do you need to do to be able to front up to a competition to enter? Apart from the glider, what else you've got to take along and how you prepare yourself for that. We'll talk a little bit about tasks, and hopefully by the end of it, we'll sort of make a conclusion as to whether or not it's worth it. I kind of had a perception of competition pilots as being the sort of Top Gun pilots, and but it really isn't correct. Sure, there are people like Peter who are very competitive, but the vast majority of the people are. I've been watching the Tour de France, and you talk about peloton, all the riders in there as being peloton fillers. I refer to myself as being a gaggle filler in these competitions. So the concerns that people would have, I guess, would be lack of experience, lack of flying experience perhaps, lack of knowledge, perhaps a perception of danger, of being more dangerous, the fear of not doing well, a fear of outlanding. All of those things, I guess, to a certain extent, in your own mind can be true, but I believe that you can easily overcome those, because really, once you get past the badge flights, competition flying is really the best way of becoming a better cross-country pilot. You've got lots of experienced pilots around. There are great mentoring programs at these competitions. There's a very supportive atmosphere, and it can be as relaxed as you want. I mean, you don't have to go off on task. You don't have to fly the day's competition. If the conditions aren't to your liking, then you can return to the airfield. So what I'd like people to consider competitions as being is really just a cross-country course but on a much larger scale. So does anyone, do you agree with that in terms of certainly some of the lower level competitions?
I'd agree with that at club regattas and things like that. If you go to, and probably even the state competitions in South Australia, if you go to a larger state competition, as well as the nationals, then I think it's done to different quality.
Well, maybe, and that's consistent with what I was going to say, because this is my history of gliding. First cross-country course in '97. I think I outlanded on an attempt at a 300k task. Then started to do distance badges, did a 300 or 500. The day I did the 500, there was a guy who did a 1000k task, and I wanted, it took me probably about 7 hours to do 500k, so I wondered how the hell you'd actually get the extra 500. Then there was a state competition, and then a first national competition, which was a club class competition. And I've been going to Horsham quite regularly. But then there was the first multi-class comp that I did in 2010. And what Peter just said, I sort of sensed that all of a sudden it was a bit harder edge. There were people there that were a bit more serious. But what I think that the take-home message there is that things like Horsham and the club class competitions are good introductions. There are certainly competitive people at those competitions, but they don't, to me, they don't seem to be as hard edge as what the multi-class comps are. There's a lot of people there flying for sheep stations, and briefings in the morning can be quite testy affairs sometimes. But certainly state comps and somewhere like Horsham is a great introduction, because there are a range of classes you can fly in. And I still think that in all of those, whether it be multi-class, and I don't want to put you off doing or thinking about multi-class, there is a great supportive atmosphere. People are prepared to help, people are prepared to give you guidance. In terms of qualifications, there's, I was hoping you might be able to assist me here, Mandy would have been, but been able to help. There are, on the GFA website, there are 2 documents which are state championship and competition rules, and this is the entrance requirements, and it talks about things like flying requirements of 25 hours, Silver C and a 300k flight. Your CFI has to sign you out as being someone that's competent, and you've got to have knowledge of MOS, you've got to be in current flying practice, and obviously a member of the GFA. Then there's a thing here called a current FAI competitor licence, which has changed a little bit. It used to ride off to Beryl Hartley and pay you money, $10 I think it was, on an application, and you'd get this little quaint folder that would come back that would give you 2 years of competitor's licence. I think it's now part of your renewal, your GFA renewal. Yeah. And obviously the annual flight review within 12 months. And a lot of these things are checked when you turn up to a competition. Sometimes they'll want you to present the documents to show, say, the annual flight review, your licence, your current GFA membership. Often though at competitions you'll just sign the fact that you have all of these things. They won't even actually cite the document. Then there's the national championship rules, which I understand are still current, which require 100 hours solo, Silver C, and this one here completed at least 2 state comps would be the relevant ones, in which at least 10 gliders competed.
Okay.
It's in there. So, I don't know. Maybe there's some local rules. I know when I flew the 2005 club class, I think I'd flown 1 state comp. I had a competitor's licence, so I went. So a little more relaxed, perhaps. So once you've, obviously what you need is some support from the club CFI to get you through all the documentation that's required. It's not onerous, but it does require you to perhaps jump on the website, look at the applying for your competition licence, talking to your CFI and talking to the CFI about what the requirements are and whether he's happy or she's happy for you to go off to a competition. So once you've got past that administrative side, what do you need in your glider, apart from the glider? Obviously, the competition will want you to have a parachute and obviously a repacking slip that's current within the last 6 months. Nowadays you will need a flight data recorder of some variety. Actually you require a mobile phone, but it's stipulated that you're not allowed to use the mobile phone in flight, looking at weather and other things of that nature. You're meant to have a functioning radio and obviously FLAM. An audio variometer is required. Also refers to accessible drinking water. The other thing that they'll want to see is third-party insurance when you turn up to a competition. So you'll have to have documentation that verifies that you've got all of that. That means a copy of the current insurance release for the glider.
Third-party insurance is now covered by VBL, so you don't necessarily need that.
So all of the administrative stuff's out of the way. It goes without saying that if you're going to turn up to a competition, then you really need to be current in the glider that you're going to be flying in. But more importantly, you need to know how everything works, and you need to know that everything needs to be working in the glider, and you've got to be able to make it work. The number of times you turn up to competition and someone's got the canopy off and in with some multimeter trying to source an instrument that's not working correctly, or someone who's got a brand new glider computer that can't program the damn thing. So these are things that you can obviously prepare for before the competition. Become competent with the thing that's in front of you, which is the instrument panel and the devices you're sitting on. I think that goes without saying. I think if you've got flying practice in the glider, and then you really need to be up to speed with all the instruments that are in there, and make sure things are in operating condition and you know how to work them. One of the things I use, I've got a Nano, which I reckon is a fantastic device, fairly inexpensive, and it's great to get out of the glider and just simply get onto your mobile phone and download the flight, and then simply upload the flight to the gliding site, to the gliding competition site. So it's a very handy piece of kit. I use an LX9000. I think nowadays a good glider computer is essential. Obviously, you've got to have something that tells you where to go, and you've got to know when you've reached either the beer can or the sector that you'll be flying into. Final glide's fairly important as well in a competition. So I think nowadays you really cannot, in terms of an instrument in the glider telling you what you need to know, these things have become, I think, almost essential. I know there are people that, I used to fly with a little colibri, which is fine, that would tell you when you've reached a particular turn point. But of course it doesn't work well in what we call area assigned tasks, which I'll explain a bit about in a moment. Pilot relief system's really important. You need to, I was told by Peter Robinson, and I said, basically, if you don't have some system that plums you up, that enables you to easily relieve yourself, particularly say at 2,000 feet. If you're busting to go at 2,000 feet, well, you're going to be on the ground, you'll outland. So you need to have a system that will enable you to urinate in the glider easily and effectively. I use external catheters, which just simply plug into a tube and then goes out the back end of the glider. And in my glider, I've got to drop the wheel to give the exit point for the tube access to the atmosphere. And so often you get people sort of saying, "Oh, your wheel's down." I hope you're not below me. This is just something that, well, this is my checklist. I photocopied my checklist. So you can see all the things, right at the top there's maintenance release. I remember getting to Horsham one week and one of the guys didn't have the maintenance release for his glider. So it arrived on the bus the next day. People that turned up without wing walkers or without their tail dolly. So this is something that I'll use, and just to make sure to actually check off that you've got everything that you need. And it's not just things for the gliders, but just simple things like bedding, clothing, all of the things that you need. So I don't go away without going through that, just making sure that I've got everything. And really, that probably, when we get to talking about rigging gliders, it'd be handy to have a checklist for virtually everything you're doing, including rigging and de-rigging gliders. The other thing that that I'll do, particularly when I went to Vinall, I made sure I had the 125 or 250,000 area maps for the relevant areas we're flying in, as well as the WAC chart for that area. So it's important, I think, to have those maps. And the other thing is to get an extra copy of maybe the 250,000 maps to give to your ground crew, so that they know where to go and get you. Download the competition turn points. Most of the websites, when there's like Horsham, for example, or Vinall, they'll have a website that you can go onto and download the competition turn points. Don't rely on last year's competition turn points, because they have a habit of changing them. So you want to make sure that you've always got the up-to-date turn points. One of the things I did before going to Vinall, because I've flown at Horsham and Waikerie, but it's the first time I've flown at Vinall, got a couple of people that had flown there before, sat down, looked at Google, made sure that we were aware of all of the ground features. There's a munitions factory there, for example, which has got one of these ground to 2,000 feet restricted areas. There's the Warby Ranges. So just, you can do a lot in terms of, before going to the competition, looking at the airfield, looking at the terrain around the airfield. And the club will, normally, Vinall had a heap of documents, so this is actually the folder that I generated before going away to Vinall, which had lots of airspace maps in it, had all of the sort of, general airfield layouts and the like, so just become familiar with the place you're going to. So it was kind of nice, the first flight that I had at Vinall, I sort of felt very familiar with the location. It just eases you into that process. You obviously need to be comfortable with rigging and de-rigging your glider. Clearly, if you're going away to a competition, you're going to have to de-rig the glider at the airfield, travel with it, be comfortable with the trailer, make sure the trailer's working correctly. This trailer, which is a Comet trailer, that arrangement there is a bit, it's not satisfactory. I need to modify it, but the road between Pinaroo and Bordertown is quite rough, and so when I got to Horsham one year, that winglet, or that outer wing panel, jumped out of its container and was sitting, on some metal component, so there was a nice little wear patch in the wing. So you just want to make sure that, that you're kind of comfortable with how the glider's going to be transported. So obviously the issue here is you need to know how to de-rig and rig your glider, because one day you're going to be in a paddock, so you're going to actually have to deal with de-rigging the glider. And I think, you shouldn't be afraid of, within competitions, of the chance of outlanding. It's fairly high. I think in the Vinall comps, I started my engine on 2 occasions, so it's going to happen. So you do need to be comfortable with outlanding and being current on it. Club class competitions are a dry comp. So again, it's a nice, relaxed competition to go to, because you don't have to worry about water ballast. Obviously, the sports class, multi-class competitions are ballasted comps. I would imagine if you get to the stage where, I would expect, if you get to the stage where you are, the CFI is signing you off on competitions, you'd be competent with the use of water ballast by that stage. Tasks. How many people here are not familiar with area assigned tasks? Because I'll start with, well, this is actually a briefing sheet from Vinall, day 2. What this shows is a speed task. So there's the aerodrome. The way that tasking normally works with a large fleet, when you've got 40 or more gliders, there'll be remote start points assigned to a class. So the 18-metre class, that was our start point. So it's actually a point, and then there's a line which is 90 degrees to the track line, and it's 5 kilometres either side, giving you a total width of 10 kilometres. The number of people that put 10 kilometres either side in and then start outside the line is extraordinary. But again, know your piece of equipment, read the sheets because it tells you all of that information. But this is a speed task. So basically, you only need to go into a beer can, a 500 metre radius around the turn point. I love these tasks because you don't have to worry about calculations and everyone's flying in the same air. They normally set them on days that are quite strong. So you start, go to that turn point, back to the control point here. The reason they were doing this was because you didn't want people on a final glide coming over that little restricted area, which was the munitions factory. So speed tasks are easy, everyone will understand those. Here what we've got is an area assigned task, an AAT. So the first thing you look for on an AAT is what the task is going to be. So it's a 3-hour task. Well, what that means is that if you've got to be out flying, well, at least 3 hours. Most people are coming in right on 3 hours and 1 minute, 3 hours and 5 minutes. But if you come in under time, then even though you've flown less time, the task distance that you've flown will be timed against 3 hours, so you will lose speed. So if you come in under time, that's an absolute no-no. So the idea is therefore to fly this 3-hour task, and what you need to do from the start point, which I think is around here, is to fly. You have to enter that area. You can just touch the circle and go in and get 1 point on the other side of the circle before you turn, or you might decide, if the conditions are fairly good and the wind conditions are right, to fly right to that edge of that circle. And you can fly out of the circle and come back in if you want to. You're kind of wasting time. But so, provided you get a data point within that circle, then you've reached that particular area. Not the turn point, the area. And of course the area is centred around that turn point. So once you get into that area, you can then at your discretion fly off to the next area. In this case it's a circle. The first two areas are circles. It's got a 25k circle, 25k. Then they're not limited, the areas are not limited to circles. They can have segments, they can have all sorts of shapes. So this last control point was a segment. And that segment, I won't go through this tonight, it's probably beyond the scope of this evening, but again it's all based on these angles, and it's actually a thistle. There is a 500k radius circle around it and then that segment. So again, you've got to go somewhere into that segment, and then you return. There's a 3 kilometre radius finish circle, which is here. That's generally done to obviously prevent people coming ballistic speeds over the airfield. So the finish point is short of the airfield. Gives the people a chance to then obviously finish, bleed off some of the speed, get back to sort of a landing height, and start getting themselves set up for landing. So that's an AAT, and in fact that was day one, 18 metre class, and it's task A. So you're given these sheets at briefing. So you turn up at the briefing. The briefing normally is a presentation from day winners from the previous day. The CD talks about housekeeping things. Then there's the weather guy will get up and talk about weather, which now has become less important than what it used to be, because most people have gone onto their computers and really worked out what the weather is anyway. So the weather guys, in fact in Vinall, I think it was more of a comedy routine. This guy he would have been a great stand-up comedian, I think. But anyway, and was wrong. I don't think the task setter was actually listening to the weather guy. They were doing different weather. But anyway, that's another story. So what they do is, as you walk into the hall for morning briefing, which is normally at 10 a.m, you go and pick one of these sheets up, and it tells you what you're going to be doing on the day. There's normally two sides. I've only copied the A task, but on the other side there'll be a B task. So what will happen is that if you all get there to grid, get out to the gridding. If the weather's not going as planned, I've got a sniffer flight up, then they might delay launch. Delays the launch, it means the day's getting a bit shorter, so then they'll go to a B task, which is maybe the same turn point, but instead of being 3 hours, it'll be 2.5 hours. So it's just reducing the length of the task or using the available time given the launch time. Some of the other important information that's contained on here is just down in this area here, which is when you're meant to take the glider out to the launch point, the runway that you'll be using, the order of classes, so 15 metre, 18 metre and open. So 15 metre first, then 18, then open. And what the expected first launch is going to be. There's also here minimum finish height, 200 feet. So that means you couldn't go across that edge of that circle at lower than 200 feet. Lose points if you did. So my process after the briefing, we know where we're going. What I'll have done is before briefing, we've got the glider ready, wing covers off, ballast in, do all the DI for the glider, get the thing ready to tow out. It's interesting, you know, because you do this day after day, and they normally put a rest day in if there's a lot of consecutive flying. It can get quite tiring. It's a good thing to be reasonably fit for these competitions. And you can make mistakes. You know, just simple things like forgetting, not that I did this, someone else who no name was, forget to take the wing tie-down ropes off and then try and tow the glider out with those still attached. It's a fairly ugly result. So it's sort of, I think the message there is to get yourself into a routine, just to you know. And if you've not done it for the first time, it's hard to get to that routine. But I tell you, after about the third or fourth day, you'll be in a routine. You know, you will get up, and in fact, we had to get out there very early because the water pressure was crap, and take you an hour to fill your glider if you weren't there at sort of 7 a.m. So it was nice to get out there really early, take plenty of time to get ready. By the time you're ready, you can have a coffee, and go off to the briefing, find out what you'll be doing every day. After briefing, it was then a matter of getting back to the glider, maybe programming the onboard computer to the logger to at least get your task in, the A task. Maybe grab a bite to eat, then tow the glider out to the launch point. Lots of people out there, lots of chat, all that sort of thing. And then everyone gets quite serious, all the cars go out and you know, the first sniffer goes up. Everyone's waiting to hear that he's got past sort of 3,000 feet. Once they do, and the CEO will say, start the launch. And so if you're at the back of the grid, you've still got 45 minutes of just standing around waiting for all the gliders in front to go. So it is, but they do actually rotate the grid system such that it's constantly moving forward, so you will have a turn on the front of the grid at some point during the competition. As it turned out, I don't have a clear memory of this. On the first day, it went to a C task. I don't quite understand why. I remember, and this will be, I remember standing on the grid because it was day one, and so just to give you a bit of an idea of the terrain, so there's Vinall, and then out in this area is Mount Buffalo and Mount Falls Creek and Hoffman. So there's some serious hills out this way. And on this particular day, the conditions were looking really good out here, out to the west. You know, Q, it was going to be 10,000 foot Q day, I think, or at least 8,000 feet. But at around, when we were launching at 11:30, at around 11:30, the clouds were really towering around sort of over the mountain area. And I remember Peter was next to me and he said, I don't like that, that looks like overdevelopment. So anyway, we, and I think they changed the task around that sort of line of overdevelopment, the sort of thunderstorm, so that this circle became a much larger sector with the turn point a little bit further south. So they can do this, they can do it on the grid. We've got these sheets handed out on the grid saying we're all going to task C. When they do that, they actually come around with a piece of paper that you've got to sign to acknowledge that you have understood that there's a task change. So you can't later on say, well, no one told me, you've flown the wrong task. So I thought, because this is was an interesting day for me, and I think you know, doing well in competitions, you've obviously got to have good flying skills, and really competition flying will develop these flying skills for you, because you can compare, you can obviously download everyone else's competition trace. You can see what climb rates they achieved against what climb rates you achieved. So I would expect that for someone who's doing their first competition, it's going to be a learning experience. It's not something that you wouldn't go out there thinking, I'm going to win this competition. I think what you've got to do is go there with a mindset of saying, I'm going to be involved in this, I'm going to compete, I'm going to fly safely, and of course the competition, there's a heavy emphasis on safety. There's a pilot briefing pack that you're given that's got a lot of heavy emphasis on lookout, heavy emphasis on your personal responsibility for being safe and flying safely. So but it certainly enables you to look at the speeds that you're achieving against other pilots, and I think that's, I wouldn't go there with expectations of saying I'm going to be competitive. That you go along there as a learning experience, and certainly the first competition I flew in, I think I flew a discus. It was the club class. I did something like 110 kph for the task that we had, but Terry Cubley did 149 kilometres an hour for the task. So clearly there was a huge difference. And when I looked at it, it was just simply mistakes that I made. I think maybe my flying skill has improved a bit, and these competitions certainly improve the flying skills. And if you're attending coaching weeks, then you're getting told how to improve. Competitions, there are people that will help you out and saying where you've made mistakes. But I've come to realise that you can have very good flying skills, but what really is the difference between average pilots like myself and good pilots like Peter? Maybe it's a bit of luck, but no, it's mainly good decision making. And this is an example of that, I think, that I'll try and get across to you to get some understanding of what I mean. So this is the task, which was the C task that we saw, obviously into good flying conditions, very strong back up to the north, so much so that most pilots went a long way north into that sector. But on return, things were getting gloomy, things were getting overdeveloped. So this is my trace. And I think it was around here, which is north of the Yarrawonga, that I had to make a decision about which way I went. So you can imagine that I'm concentrating on this turn point, and at that point it would have been right there that I would have gone. That's the point that I was concentrating on. So you can imagine looking down in that direction. So what's in front of me is the mountains to the left, Vinall is to the right. Right in front of me is Virga, a rain shower coming down. I can see to the right that there's great flying conditions, and further west you went, the better they got. I can see around to the left-hand side of the Virga that things look clear. And I suppose because I've done a lot of flying at Waikerie, my assumption is that it's going to be better behind the Virga. If it's clear to the left and it's still clear behind, then it must be reasonable flying conditions on the other side of that rain shower. So, for me, the best path was left of the rain shower, which meant that I was between really Vinall and the mountains. And I suppose what I didn't realise was that obviously if it's overdeveloped from that point, it's just going to be overdeveloped right through to the mountains. So maybe a little bit of local knowledge helps there. But nonetheless, that's the decision I made. So you can see here, I'm tracking along there until I get to this point and realise things are not so flash. They're very quiet, and that's the point where I started my engine. I just got down to sort of around 1,500 feet, and it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to get anywhere. So it was engine back to Manoa. So that this part of the leg is all using the engine. I was kind of looking at that and thinking, well, how can anyone finish in these conditions? How could they have done that? But when I got back, yeah, there was people that got around. And this is Tom Claffey's trace.
I was waiting.
You were with him, yeah. I'll talk about that in a minute too. What I find amazing is this, that he's flown, like that decision point there, he's gone right. And he's gone a long way right. He's gone, you know, well off track. He's even further west of Vinall. And look what he's done. He's gone zip, zip, like that. How brilliant's that? He's just simply flown into the good air. I mean, he's kind of known it's going to be crap.
I thought it was really brilliant was it's just in front of me. So when he made this deviation here, because I was following him here, and we're trying to go there, remember, and he's going this way, over here, and he turns and heads for that, and I'm thinking, he knows what he's doing. I'm going to follow him. And I did, and I followed him and did the same thing effectively. So even if you don't necessarily have the skills yourself, if you can pick the right people to be around, we can learn from them. I mean, you can workshop them a bit. But you can also learn from
hence when I said there was a little bit of luck involved. But yeah, you know, at the end of the day, the good pilots make good decisions. But the one thing that I've come to know is, you know, there's a couple of occasions where flying at Horsham, we just have one bad day. Now it's happened to me twice now, being in the lead and having a bad day on the last day. And you just so much swearing inside the cockpit. It's unbelievable. The thing is that with AATs, you know, what's great about these computers, glide computers that we have, is that particularly with AATs, you can adjust the turn points. You can actually go into the computer, into the zone you're flying to. So, for example, with this task, what I probably would do is fly sort of out here somewhere. So you can actually, on the glide computer, you can pick the point. And really what you're doing, because there's so much area there, it's providing the pilot the opportunity to decide where they're going to go based on the weather conditions. You know, there was one instance where we flew and there was, just assume this is the area we were flying into, there was a huge line of convergence along here, so it's pretty clear you're not going to fly to the right of it, you're going to go to the left, because you then had to go out further west. So, you know, the areas, it's designed in weather conditions that aren't that certain to give you options to fly into parts of sky that's still going to know where you get around. That's what they do it for. But it's also done in club class, where you've got a huge range of glider performances, where you've got, you know, older gliders and newer gliders. Some older gliders can only touch the circles, and you know that's their 3 hours, whereas more modern gliders need more distance. So AATs. So if you go to Horsham, they'll always have AATs because it enables the fleet to compete, you know, around the same course effectively. But what the glide computer can do is you can put the point at a location. So you might say, well, I want to actually fly down here because it gives me a better line in relation to the wind, for example. You know, turn it more into a crosswind rather than into the wind, if possible. So you can actually set the point and then aim the next point, and then what you can start to do is adjust the point based on the 3-hour time zone, so you can time limit. So you can start fiddling that turn point in terms of the speed you're achieving to actually make sure that when you come back, you're coming back just over the 3 hours. So the computer's doing the work, but it's doing the maths. There is a way of which you can do it mentally, which is based on for every kilometre it takes you a minute, or 3 kilometres every minute at 90 knots, thereabouts. So, you know, sometimes I'll do a little bit of a double check in terms of distance back to the airfield, just to make sure that, I mean, what it means is that if you're flying into this circuit here, you've got to make a decision of when you turn around. So at what point do I say I've gone far enough, so that when I've got the remaining distance back here, that I'm still going to come in slightly over the 3-hour time zone. Because once you turn, there's no going back. There's no point going back, because you might as well just fly slower. Well, you might as well come in under time, because you're effectively still going to get that sort of speed. So it's really critical to judge when you turn, so that, and you've got a little bit of what they call a time soak down here, where you can stretch it out a bit perhaps if you're running under time. But the computers are really there to adjust those times for you. Where it goes all pear-shaped, because the computer is really telling you what your position of turning is going to be based on the conditions being constant through the flight. So in other words, very strong conditions all the way around. Where it goes pear-shaped is where the conditions just turn off, and you've all of a sudden gone way too far. And then what you're doing is you're flying for a long period of time in crappy conditions, and that's when you can become really unstuck, which has happened to me a couple of times. You know, there was a guy that came in 15 minutes under time, and he beat me because basically I'd gone too far and effectively got a slower speed, even though he was 15 minutes under time. So there's a bit of skill in the AATs in working those out. Obviously, that's where I say I think it's probably important to have the glide computers to enable you to fly these things, so you're not having to do a lot of maths and high workloads and everything in the cockpit. You want to make it as easy as possible. So I thought this was, for me, it's a salutary lesson in terms of the ability of the top pilots really to pick the conditions and to understand how to actually get around a task. So will it be worth the effort for you to go to these competitions? I reckon it will be, and I really would encourage people to aim at getting into competitions. Obviously, from the way that I went through coaching weeks, state comps, horseshoe, onto nationals is a nice, easy way of progressing into the competitions. But the whole thing is, it's the best way to hone your cross-country skills. It's the best way of learning craft. So, certainly badge flights are good fun, record flights are good fun, but I think competition flying is where you will really hone your cross-country skills. Thanks for your attention. Questions? Comments? So,
Okay.
You're a competition pilot,
Yeah, I was just thinking that one thing which could help you take part in the competition is to have a crew, because then you know that if you do land out, they'll come and get you. You don't have to worry about that part of it all.
In fact, probably, maybe a really soft introduction to competition flying is to offer to be a crew member for someone to actually go and experience a competition from a crew's position. But I didn't mention crew because a lot of people turn up to competitions without crew. It's not the right thing to do, but it's not frowned upon. Certainly in places like Horsham, there's plenty of people around. But I remember at this club and sports class competition at Waikerie, there was a day where the whole fleet got landed out, and I obviously started my engine and got back, and as soon as I got back to the clubhouse, Mandy handed me a piece of paper and said, "Go and get this guy." So there's plenty of people to help out and come and get you, but it's kind of helpful to have a crew if at all possible. And I suppose the other thing is that a lot of people, I suppose when we turn up to Waikerie, there's a range of accommodation. People will stay on the airfield in tents. You're a tent person, aren't you? Other people, what we do in Horsham is a group of us that go over that hire a house in Horsham. And the flying's a bit incidental. It's more the food and wine. But see, that's at the end of the day, that's the social aspect of it, which is a bit of fun. And there's always, like at Horsham, there's meals put on at the gliding club afterwards. It's around the bar. It's and again, I go back to that slide that I had up. It's a competition, and for the really serious people, they're there to compete and do well. But there's a lot of people that are there just to have a lot of fun and treat it as a cross-country course. And I think that's what I'm trying to emphasise. Although it's a competition, you can go there and treat it as just a large cross-country course. I think that's a fair statement for someone like Horsham and probably the club class. So I think you should have a go. If you're at the stage where you've got a few of the badges, where you qualify in terms of those pilot requirements, and I really strongly urge you to think about having a go at it.
I've sort of got a question about the whole PowerPoint and how one of those cross-country passes will be flown. So the way I understand it is, say if it's been set for 3 hours,
yes,
you have to basically touch every single one of those points and fly the longest distance possible in 3 hours.
Correct.
That's how I understand it, but that's how it works.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
So probably.
Well, because there's a guy that always gets stuck into me about saying, because I say I came in overtime, and he says, no, you haven't come in overtime. You're allowed to fly more than 3 hours. And I can remember one day where I did. I flew more than half an hour over the allocated time, but it's only because I got to an area which was really strong and the conditions were great. So I was spending more time in better conditions, my speed is going up. Right? So it's probably in my interest to fly overtime in that circumstance. Generally though, late in the day, conditions are going to be weakening off. You don't want to be out in weak conditions. If you're spending time in weak conditions, then your speeds will be coming down.
So, just another question, sorry. How is it all worked out? How do you work out? Because obviously you talk about undertime and overtime and all of that. So do you times figures together? Or do you times a few figures together? Or do you divide some of these figures? How do you work out? Obviously you have more than one glider flying around this course. So
yes, everyone starts. Okay, so there's no one who. Everyone can start at whatever time they want, and obviously flight recorders are required. So when you upload the trace, the scorer will be obviously taking your trace, making sure that you've gone over the start line and that you haven't gone over the start line before the start gate opens. So what will happen is that the start gate opens, I think generally for lowish heights around 5,000 feet, the start gate opens 15 minutes after the last glider in the class is launched. It might be longer if the day's going high. So then there'll be an announcement over the radio that the start gate is open. So the scorer is checking to make sure that you haven't gone across the start gate before it opened, and we'll check that you've gone into all of the areas. And of course that trace then tells you if that trace is confirmed as being the correct start all around or into the areas and across the finish line, that gives them the speed. So if you've flown over the allocated time 3 hours, then you'll get the real speed that you've done for that time that you're flying, be it 3 hours and 10 minutes or 3 hours and 1 minute.
So it's really a speed contest.
Oh, yeah. It's always, they're all speeds. They're all speed contests. That's right. Yeah.
So there's no penalty for finishing overtime.
No.
And the way I understand it is that there is some sort of penalty for finishing under time.
Correct,
so
because what you'll have, if you finish under time, so if you're 5 minutes under time, so you've flown 2 hours and 55 minutes, you might have a speed of 120 kilometres an hour for that 2 hours and 55 minutes.
Yes.
But it won't be 2 hours and 55 minutes, it'll be 3 hours. So in other words, the distance that you've flown, because the computer will look at where you've turned. So if you've gone into an area, it picks a point at which you're now tracking off in a different direction. So it roughly works out where you turned. And so it knows how far you've flown. So instead of working out your speed based on the 2 hours and 55 minutes for that distance, it divides it by 3 hours, in which case you'll go from 110 kilometres an hour down to probably 95 kilometres an hour.
Okay, so minutes are quite a... Okay, no, I understand how all of that works. So if you fly faster, for example, you just fly faster and do 3 hours and 20 minutes.
If you fly faster, you're just going to do greater distance.
Yeah, and you don't get penalty.
That's right. And so, that's why in 29s, I generally, as a rule, will fly towards the outer edge of the circle to maximise that circle, because then I give myself plenty of options depending on what the weather's doing. In other words, I'm never going to go into this circle and then head off this way, because all of a sudden I might not have enough distance to actually come in over the time, at the time or over the
That
time.
makes all the sense. That I'm getting flashbacks now to my flights.
So you try and fly and gag it within your competitions or avoid them?
Well, it's really interesting with these area assigned tasks. You have 50 gliders there, and you feel like there's no one else around. It is really interesting sometimes. But having said that, now, I mean, you will see from that slide, I've flown some competitions. Well, I've not flown a lot of competitions, and generally the comps that I've flown at, like places like Horsham, are fairly relaxed. So anyway, Vinall this year, I figure I'm going to see what these start games are all about. So the start gate opens, and generally, you know, the 18-metre gliders were going to be sort of there or thereabouts the start point. So you could kind of, you could see, oh, there's the gaggle, let's go and join it, and thermal up, and then people would move off and go to some other thermal, and you know, there'd be 2 gaggles normally around the 18-metre start point. So the start gate's open, going around thinking, okay, clearly if you head off first, all you're doing is providing a thermal marker for the gliders that follow. So clearly, you know, you want to wait until a few people go. So I'm thinking, okay, we'll hang around and wait until vacancy. So we're going around and around, it's half an hour. Half an hour's gone past. And we've got something like a 400-kilometre task to do, right? And so, you know, again, you've got to start thinking, okay, what's my dead drop point of when I want to start? Well, I have to start, because if I don't, I'm not going to make it around. So, you know, you've got to have some, if you're really serious competition pilot, I mean, for less serious people, start gate opens, just go, you know, just start. If you know, there's no crime in doing that. But this day I sort of hung around, so okay, half an hour. Okay, half an hour's okay, we've still got plenty of time. Another half an hour goes past, and at this point, you're just looking at all these gliders, and they're all still there. And, and you're going around, and so, you know, here's the start line. Past it, okay, no one started. Okay, go around again, and you come around, you've got a view of the start line, and all the other gliders are just going, start, you bastard, start. And around they go. It was just extraordinary. We were there for an hour and a half playing this start game. And you get to a point where it's just like a game of chicken of who's prepared to be there for the longest amount of time. Because on that day, the guy that won the day was the person who started last. Because he just had all of these people in front of him that he could just simply hop to all their thermals. He could fly directly to where the lift was going to be, and so there is an advantage in it. And to be frank, I mean, you have to have nerves of steel, and you have to be experienced to do that. And that's the different level of where you've got people like Peter who really are top competitors and play those sort of games and are there to win. But I'm not saying not everyone needs to be there to win. Most people can be there to have a good time, and you know, I know there were certain days where some of the guys thought, no, this is no good, I'm turning back, conditions are not safe, turning short, I'm not happy, I've been out too long, or the task is too long. I remember one of the days, I was told later, because what happens is that there's 2 pilots that are chosen to go to the task plan. There's a task setter, and then each day there's pilot representatives that turn up there. Anyway, this one guy who was the task setter was obviously on a different weather planet than everyone else, because, you know, he said we had, you know, briefing, there was a minimum start height, you couldn't start above 9,500 feet, so, you know, fantastic. But the problem was, there's one weather model, RAS, well, one XC Skies was sort of booming day, fantastic, yeah, the sky's the limit. But the other weather model, the RAS, was kind of a bit, 4,000 feet, so there was a disparity between the two. But I think it's a natural tendency for people to pick the best one, and that's what it's going to be. So where we were hanging around, we got
4,000 feet.
At 4,000 feet, with this, well, the guy was planning a 750 task, and the pilot rep said, "You've got to be joking." So it became a 650 or 600 kilometre task, I think it was.
And there was start gate games as well.
Oh yeah.
I didn't set off that day until 3 p.m. A 650k task, and it was a shit day.
I honestly don't know how you make that decision. Like, seriously, 3 p.m.
Yep. And the reason is, if all the top guys are in the gaggle with you, also not starting, the best thing to do is not to start. The best thing to do is for everyone not to start, or not to start until very late. Even if you're all outland, a quarter of the way around the task, halfway around the task, if all of the top guys that you're trying to compete against are with you, it doesn't matter. Right? Because you've only got to beat those guys that are next to you. You don't actually have to get around the task. And so it's for those sorts of reasons that the start gate games happen.
Look, there's all, and I mean, obviously for those people that are the top pilots, you know, that these are things that are taken into account. But I think at the level that most people here are at, people who haven't flown competitions, you know, that's the Tom Cruise Maverick stuff, right? And I don't know that we necessarily need to be at that level. As I said, you can go.
Sounds like a really good competition.
Oh,
You
but
see Max Scales, he's world champion. He doesn't enjoy competition for those sorts of reasons. He'd rather just go out doing anything and have fun. He can't. He really got a competition, so he'd be doing it. But yeah, but just take some of the fun out of it if you're really doing it at that very top level.
that's another interesting thing, because I remember Matthew was at Horsham one year. I think the reason he was there is he was told that if he was going to fly at the upcoming Australian Nationals competition, he had to get a whole heap of competitions in. And I think you know, obviously Matthew's really now a top class pilot, obviously, but there was a point when he wasn't. You know, and at Horsham he kind of finished midfield. And I think there was a sports and top class national at Gawler. I think the first day he outlanded 25 k's from the airfield, so sort of he's probably improved a little bit since then. But everyone's got to start somewhere. I think that's the point. If you haven't flown in competitions and you're getting to the point where you're doing cross-country flying and getting involved in badge flying, then really competitions are the next thing that you should be thinking about. Not to go and win, but to be involved, and I think the environment is supportive enough for you to have a good time.
We should probably think about wrapping it up. Are there any final questions for Craig? Well, thank you. Enjoy my
Pleasure.